Beneath the fractured hills of Jerusalem and layers upon layers of buried history, something ancient finally broke its long silence. For centuries, people have hunted for Solomon's lost tomb. Now something has been uncovered. But is it truly his resting place, or simply a trick of time and stone? Before history swallows the truth once again, it's worth noting that King Solomon is a genuinely fascinating figure, largely because the Bible makes so many bold claims about him. Let's dig into what was discovered and why the world may not have been prepared to face it. The legend of Solomon's lost tomb. People called it nothing more than a myth until a forgotten tunnel turned everything upside down. For centuries, searchers combed beneath the hills of Jerusalem, chasing whispers of a king buried alongside riches beyond all imagination, a king whose name still echoes powerfully across time. Solomon. He was celebrated not only for his wisdom, but for building a kingdom so extraordinarily wealthy and mighty that it left the entire ancient world speechless. Solomon came into power as a teenager, picking up where his father, King David, had left off. But he didn't simply keep the kingdom breathing. He transformed it entirely. Trade exploded outward. Gold flooded in from distant lands. And at the heart of it all, he erected the first temple, a 7-year labor of devotion, radiant with cedar timber brought in from Lebanon. Gold panels shimmered in the sunlight, and the stonework was so precisely cut it scarcely required mortar to hold together. The tales of his wise judgments are equally remarkable. Take the story of 2 women who both claimed the same infant. Solomon proposed splitting the child in 2, not out of any cruelty, but to see which woman would surrender him. One of them did. That revealed the true mother. His true mother. That single moment transformed him into a lasting symbol of justice and sharp intellect throughout the ancient world. Even the Queen of Sheba made the journey to meet him, arriving with caravans loaded with spices, gold, and clever riddles. She departed utterly astonished. Not only had Solomon answered every question she posed, but he had surpassed every story she had ever heard about him. How can you see through sand? You mean across sand? No, through sand, your majesty. His empire reached far beyond the walls of Jerusalem. Ships set sail toward Ophir and Tarshish, mysterious distant lands that some scholars believe lay in Africa or India, returning with ivory, apes, and extraordinary riches. Down in the Timnah Valley in southern Israel, copper mines under his control produced wealth that archaeologists are still piecing together to this day. Yet one mystery has never faded. Where exactly is Solomon's tomb? There is no stone marker, no chamber, nothing at all to confirm where he was finally laid to rest. Some were convinced it had to lie beneath the Temple Mount. Others pointed to hidden caves or sealed-off chambers untouched for thousands of years. Over the decades, the search gradually lost momentum, weighed down by too many dead ends and too many legends that most experts quietly walked away from. No, it is only the appetizer of the 4th season. We're going to keep going. But then something changed. A discovery, accidental or deliberate, depending on who you ask, cracked this ancient puzzle wide open. And what emerged wasn't merely a tomb. It was a message sealed in silence for 3,000 years, now forcing its way back into the light. What was inside? We're only just getting started. The relentless quest for the tomb. We were led down excavated tunnels and shown one of the world's most breathtaking archaeological wonders. A single crack in the ground, barely noticeable after a rainstorm, rewrote everything. For centuries, tracking down King Solomon's tomb felt like chasing your own shadow. From medieval knights digging under the Temple Mount to 19th century explorers tearing through the Judean hills, every single search concluded the same way, empty-handed. Some walked away certain the tomb had never existed at all, while others blamed misfortune, or, worse still, flawed maps. By the time the 21st century arrived, the majority of experts had simply stopped looking. But recently, the tide turned. Dr. Emily Carter, an archaeologist far better known for dusty manuscripts than media attention, was deep within Jerusalem's archives when something unusual caught her eye. Tax records dating back to Solomon's reign. Buried within an old Hebrew text was a quiet hint. Payments directed to a location, deliberately kept off the official books. A place situated near the city of David. A site so thoroughly concealed that even history itself had forgotten it was there. The city of David is a place where if you take a shovel and start digging, whatever you pull from the earth is going to correspond directly to the pages of the Bible. Armed with radar technology capable of penetrating solid rock, her team began scanning a rugged hillside slope in Silwan. The earth pushed back hard, with sharp limestone, shifting soil, and constant setbacks driven by growing political unrest, sparking terrifying moments like the one that had occurred just earlier that month. Yet the team pressed forward day after day until nature made its own move. An unexpected rainstorm softened the hillside, exposing a shallow depression in the ground. Something about that opening seemed wrong. It simply didn't fit. Beneath that very spot, the radar flickered like a pulse, and what it detected were tunnels, not formed naturally, but deliberately constructed and running deep. The tunnel had been carved straight into solid rock, reaching a depth of roughly 13 meters underground. The crew was stunned, and a wave of excitement surged through everyone instantly. The team rushed to secure the site. Every single dig carried real danger. They also uncovered that the tunnel had been built with false entrances, and one careless mistake could send centuries' worth of secrets crumbling down with the stone. Dr. Carter spent countless late nights working through fragments of ancient script, assembling a trail that had been deliberately laid to mislead thieves and tomb raiders, symbols pointing toward a concealed entrance. Nothing showy about it, just clever and quietly hidden where anyone could overlook it. The greater portion of this structure remains buried, still waiting to be uncovered. What we currently hold amounts to less than a quarter of it. Honestly, I'd say considerably less than that. But none of that was truly the turning point. The turning point arrived when the team came across a story, a half-forgotten legend handed down among shepherds, about a hillside that would glow beneath the light of the moon, a wall that shimmered the way stars do. Dr. Carter stood right there at the edge of that same hill. The ground was wet, their boots sinking deeper with each step forward. Yet something about that stillness, the way those rocks sat motionless as though guarding something, felt undeniably real. They were close. Everyone felt it. And just past that sealed tunnel, behind a doorway left untouched for thousands upon thousands of years, something was sitting there waiting to be found. What the team discovered next didn't simply rewrite history, it stopped them completely in their tracks, breaking open an ancient seal. That week, archaeologists were unveiling the long-lost tomb of an ancient king. What if the only barrier standing between today's world and a 3,000-year-old secret was a single stone slab that was never supposed to be opened? That seal didn't give way quietly. It let out a sound like something ancient had finally breathed out after millennia of silence. After weeks of fighting through jagged limestone, choking dust, and creeping uncertainty, Dr. Emily Carter's crew had traced a paper trail from crumbling tax records all the way to a forgotten hillside in Silwan. And now they stood facing a stone slab so deeply buried in time that the earth itself seemed to have deliberately concealed it. But this was no ordinary rock. It was a barrier, a warning, and a riddle all rolled into one. Getting past it wasn't a matter of simply pushing or pulling. This slab was part of a far larger design, one engineered specifically to guard whatever lay behind it. Hidden within the narrow tunnel walls were false pathways and dead ends, some deliberately built to bring the entire structure down if anyone disturbed them. The stonework was ancient, yet the level of defense it represented was nothing short of brilliant, a trap laid by people who anticipated grave robbers and outsmarted every single one of them. While the ground groaned and shifted beneath their feet, Dr. Carter examined old Hebrew markings positioned near the entrance. A sequence consisting of 7 lines, 7 symbols, and a carved pattern connected to the First Temple's 7-year construction period. Stretching from the rebuilding of the Temple and Jerusalem all the way to a coming Messianic king, this was no decorative detail, it was a deliberate clue. Her team set to work using laser instruments and 3-dimensional scanners, mapping every groove and chamber as carefully as if they were disarming an explosive device. The tension in the air was as thick as heavy fog. A single wrong move could bury the entire team, quite literally. For 3 consecutive days, they adjusted levers, aligned gears, and held their breath each time stone ground against stone. The deeper they moved into the tunnel, the more complete the silence became, as though the mountain itself had grown attentive. And then it happened. A deep snap, a low rolling rumble, and dust poured down from the ceiling above. The slab began shifting, not swiftly, not smoothly, but enough to open a dark sliver into something otherworldly. They stepped back, staring into that black void before them. No sound came from inside, no movement of air, just cold stillness and darkness. Workers dedicated to preventing the surrounding caves from being looted had been filming when the discovery moment arrived. Dr. Carter lifted her hand, signaling everyone around her to stay quiet. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. That moment was a turning point. It was the very first breath of a tale no one had spoken aloud in millennia. But what exactly was lurking in the darkness? Let's just say the tomb hadn't surrendered all of its secrets quite yet. And the next step ahead would leave even the greatest doubters completely speechless. Go ahead and hit like if you're just as hooked as we are, because things only go deeper from this point on. A glimpse at Solomon's riches. The instant the flashlight beam struck gold, everything came to a halt. No words, no breathing, just the stunned silence of realizing they weren't hunting a legend anymore. They were living inside one, deep underneath the city of David, in a sealed chamber, untouched across thousands of years. Dr. Carter's team stood side by side, their flashlights shaking in trembling hands. What spread out before them wasn't rumor. It wasn't myth or folklore. It was an actual treasure, piled up, stacked high, and tucked into corners as though it had simply been sitting there, waiting. Lining the walls were golden vessels, their surfaces etched with ancient Hebrew lettering, gleaming as if they'd been freshly polished. A Hebrew inscription had been uncovered during routine conservation work at an ancient synagogue in the northern part of Israel. The air inside the room carried a scent of thyme, spices, and resins, something earthy and sweet that seemed to hang in every breath. At the far end of the chamber, a 7-branched menorah rose up from the floor, heavy and flawless. Its curves, its base, every detail matched what the first temple was said to have contained. But this was no museum reproduction. This was the real thing, possibly original, and it was only the beginning. Everywhere their eyes landed, the chamber seemed to whisper something. Fragments of silk, faded but unmistakable, hinted at trade routes that reached all the way to India. Delicate carvings in ivory spoke of agreements struck across African kingdoms. Small jewelry boxes, some still latched shut, held earrings and chains decorated with emeralds, rubies, and lapis. One of the archaeologists, completely overwhelmed, leaned forward and murmured, "This makes the British Museum look like a thrift shop." Even more astonishing, a sealed clay jar was cracked open, releasing a soft puff of fragrance, saffron, frankincense, and something with a citrusy edge. Spices so surprisingly fresh it was as if time itself had simply paused right there. The whole thing felt almost too perfectly arranged, as though someone had deliberately set it all up to be discovered one day. But not every detail made sense. Certain pieces carried symbols nobody could identify. The style of a few objects looked somehow newer, or at least noticeably different. The archaeologists involved said they were eager to push forward, hoping more discoveries still lay ahead. Could these items have belonged to Rehoboam, Solomon's son, or perhaps some other ruler who hid his wealth alongside a legend? The excitement was genuine, but so was the uncertainty. And inside a room like that, uncertainty tends to echo. Still, every single object, each jewel, each carved figure told its own separate story. And taken all together, they sketched a picture that felt pulled directly from Scripture. Yet as breathtaking as it all was, the chamber felt more like a preview than the main event. So the team proceeded with great care. Laser scanners traced every surface in precise detail. Not a single artifact was moved without being fully documented first, because one careless step, one clumsy hand, could wipe away what the desert had protected for so many centuries, a discovery of note. Fragments of a biblical scroll, along with other ancient relics, had been located inside desert caves across Israel. The menorah alone had the potential to reshape everything we thought we understood about the temple, but nobody was ready to celebrate yet, because they had come here looking for a tomb. And this place didn't look like one at all. Yet everyone in that space could sense it. This chamber wasn't where the story ended, it was simply the very first layer. And whatever lay beneath it had been buried there for a reason. The symbols that defied explanation and the knowledge hidden within them. The gold was breathtaking, no question. But it was the writing carved into the walls that truly stopped everyone cold. Still running on the energy from the treasure chamber, Dr. Carter's team turned their attention towards something far more unsettling. Hidden among everything else were biblical treasures, unlike anything Israel had encountered in more than half a century. Torchlight revealed a cluster of markings cut directly into the stone. Symbols that weren't simply decorative, they seemed to pulse with some kind of meaning. Right at the center was a star-shaped seal, precise and intentional, nearly identical to the one described in ancient writings as the Mark of Solomon. Not merely a royal emblem, but according to legend, a powerful instrument used to command spirits. And it didn't end there. The engravings ran tightly together in geometric patterns, some straightforward, others layered with spirals and angles so exact they resembled technical diagrams. One archaeologist murmured, "This isn't ordinary math. This goes way beyond temple measurements." Certain symbols laid out ratios, angles, and architectural detail so elaborate that the 10th century BCE started feeling suspiciously ahead of its time. Even Dr. Carter cracked a joke. "We showed up looking for a tomb and walked away with Solomon's calculus notebook." Then came the tablets, stacked in the corner as though patiently waiting for someone to pick them up. A collection of clay tablets covered in dense Hebrew script, some worn and faded, others perfectly etched, with the name of God inscribed in Hebrew. With more on that, here's David Campanale. One of them described temple dimensions almost word for word from the book of 1 Kings. But another was altogether different. The language shifted, the structure bent the rules. It read less like a historical record and more like a riddle. That particular tablet referenced something unusual, a key connected to hidden knowledge. Dr. Carter stopped in his tracks. Could it be a reference to the mystical key of Solomon, a text bound up in rituals and ancient codes long written off as legend? Nobody said it aloud, but the idea was hanging in the air. What if these weren't building instructions at all? What if they were concealing something far deeper? Then somebody spotted it. A chest tucked into a shadowy recess in the wall, almost overlooked, roughly the size of a carry-on bag. It looked dense and heavy, sealed with metal latches and carved with the very same star symbol from the wall. There were no hinges or any visible locking mechanism. You could sense the atmosphere change as everyone crowded in. Nobody reached for it. Touching it felt too risky, far too risky, but the pull was overwhelming. Was this where Solomon stored his real secrets? Could it somehow point toward the Ark of the Covenant? Or would it simply swing open a door to even more unanswered questions? And just when things seemed like they couldn't grow any more unusual, someone picked out a detail buried within the carvings. One that matched nothing they had encountered before. A symbol that felt wrong for its place and wrong for its era. That's the moment the whole story veered sharply in a new direction. The academic firestorm. We'll keep going. And very soon, we're going to come across something truly significant and remarkable right over there. It wasn't the treasure or the menorah that shook the world. It was a single sentence chiseled into stone that sounded like Solomon speaking directly from beyond death. "Only because the blood of David runs through your veins just as it runs through mine. I spare your life, yet I cast you out of Israel for eternity." Dr. Carter's team had just wrapped up their work, deciphering the strange star-shaped carvings when they noticed it. Tucked along the eastern wall of the tomb, barely catching the torchlight. 5 lines of ancient Hebrew, worn smooth by time, yet still sharp enough to send a chill through the room. It reads, "May wisdom steady my hand, as stars steady sailors." That line landed with force, not simply because it echoed the poetic register of Proverbs, but because it felt intimate, as though someone, perhaps Solomon himself, had left behind a message intended to endure through centuries of silence. Back at the base camp tent, everything erupted. Laptops chimed, phones rang out, and photographs of the inscription shot across continents. By the time morning light broke over Jerusalem, the academic world was already ablaze. Certain experts declared it the definitive proof. The writing style, the language, the location, every element aligned with Solomon's reign, right down to the 970 to 931 BCE dating drawn from the chamber walls. All right, that's one part of the double gates on the Temple Mount, the section that also descends underground beneath the Temple Mount. They pointed to earlier discoveries, the menorah, the trade goods, the architectural notes, and declared this was the breakthrough, the missing link, the real man standing behind the myth. But not everybody was convinced. Critics moved quickly, dismantling the evidence piece by piece. They challenged the authenticity of the carvings. Some even argued the phrasing felt overly refined, almost too flawless. Others flagged faint symbols near the inscription that appeared Persian in origin, raising the possibility that someone living centuries later had carved it to imitate Solomon's voice. Inside conference halls and across online forums, it descended into chaos. Professors talked over one another on live streams. Journal editors held back publications to weigh emerging theories, and headlines screamed everything from Solomon discovered to sacred hoax. And standing right at the center of it all was Dr. Carter stood composed amid the surrounding chaos. We never set out searching for a king, yet the clues kept accumulating. If that doesn't deserve investigation, then what does? Every line of that inscription felt weightier now, more than mere words scratched into stone. It suggested a king wrestling with authority, gazing at the stars for answers, and possibly, just possibly, leaving behind the only first-person record of his reign. And my ears are barely catching priests and muttering old men. I will show you I am king in Israel. But one problem still remained. If the carving was genuine, then what or who was sealed inside that final chamber just ahead? Because Solomon's name might have ignited debate, but what the team was about to discover next would leave everyone speechless. A discovery that rattles beliefs. One name cut into stone unleashed a storm that spread far beyond the world of archaeology. Just days after deciphering that haunting prayer, possibly written by Solomon's own hand, Dr. Carter's team stumbled onto something even more explosive. Near the rear of the chamber, beneath a thin coating of dust, was a fresh set of inscriptions, ancient Hebrew, carefully chiseled, describing a royal visit in 950 BCE from the Queen of Sheba. Your Royal Majesty, permit me to present my sovereign, Her Royal Majesty, the Queen of Sheba. The instant they translated her name, it felt as though time itself had frozen, because this wasn't simply another biblical reference. This was the precise account told in the book of 1 Kings and within the Quran. Solomon and Sheba, two figures divided by history yet honored across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, were now potentially united in stone. Rabbis hunched over Torah scrolls, imams cross-referencing passages from the 27th chapter of Surah, and priests murmuring over worn Bibles. The carving didn't merely echo scripture. It seemed to breathe life into it, like a bridge of stone stretching across thousands of years. But for every believer rejoicing, a scholar was already narrowing their eyes. Some called the timing suspiciously convenient. Others highlighted stylistic irregularities in the carved symbols, details that didn't quite align with the 10th century BCE. Could someone have added it afterward, a tribute left by a devoted scribe, or worse, a deliberate forgery designed to ignite religious passions? Tension escalated rapidly. Online discussions dissolved into shouting matches. Certain Islamic scholars contended that the tomb's lavishness conflicted with how the Quran portrayed Solomon. Wise, certainly, but never excessive. If you go and visit the place yourself, you'll see that these chambers he uncovered were heavily damaged. Meanwhile, political figures in Jerusalem argued over rightful ownership of the site. Religious boundaries, already stretched thin, began throbbing with fresh intensity. Yet beneath all the noise, something deeper was stirring. Because the carvings suggested more than just a royal encounter, they pointed toward an alliance, toward trade, diplomacy, and shared wisdom between two ancient powers. And if that genuinely occurred, it could mean the sacred stories aren't purely spiritual, they're historical. Still, the question lingered. Were these inscriptions revealing the truth or simply showing us what we hoped to see? And just as the debate reached its peak, the team uncovered something tucked inside a sealed alcove behind the Sheba wall. Not another inscription, not a crown. Something that threatened to shift everything all over again, and it was never intended to be found. A king's seal brought to light. It wasn't another carving. It wasn't a scroll. It was something smaller, yet heavier in meaning than everything else combined. Folded into the corner of the chamber, behind a cracked stone table untouched for centuries, lay a gold ring, thick, solid, and unmistakably royal. At first glance, it appeared to be just another buried ornament, but then the light caught its surface. Carved into the face of the ring was a six-pointed star. This wasn't some contemporary symbol borrowed from a modern flag. It was rough, hand-carved, and ancient, yet it bore just enough resemblance to the Star of David to freeze every person in that room. Laboratory testing would later confirm it. The metallurgy matched perfectly with the 10th century BCE, but even before those results came back, the whispers had already begun. Was this Solomon's ring, his royal seal? The very one that may have stamped trade agreements with Phoenicia, letters sent to Sheba, decrees that defined and shaped the entire kingdom of Israel? Right around then, it hit them. This wasn't merely a ring. It was a signature, a personal mark. Even so, caution started creeping in. Certain experts pointed out that comparable rings had already surfaced from the 8th century BCE, most of them connected to King Hezekiah and the Star of David. That symbol hadn't entered mainstream Jewish tradition until much later. So the question hung in the air. Was this a coincidence, a passed-down family piece, or had Solomon embraced the symbol long before history ever wrote it down? Picture the team bent over microscopes, tracing the seal's edges with laser-like accuracy. Every groove and scratch was argued over as though it carried the weight of the universe. These ancient structures rise like ghostly landmarks from a buried past, their real history. Handling the piece was no small matter either. Micro tools, oxygen-regulated cases, days upon days of cleaning without ever actually making direct contact. One careless breath and the whole thing could fall apart, but the stakes made it worthwhile. Because if this ring genuinely belonged to Solomon, it could represent the first direct connection between his hand and the world he once governed. And just as the team started to feel they'd uncovered the crown jewel of the entire excavation, they heard something, a faint echo, almost like stone shifting or something stirring deep within the wall. Because directly behind where the seal had been resting, there was another wall, and behind that, well, nobody was prepared for what was waiting. Echoes of Solomon's music. Just behind the wall that had concealed the golden seal, they discovered something that resembled a song. Archaeology continues to unravel the enigma of how and why these wonders were ever built. At first look, it appeared to be more script chiseled into stone. But as the dust settled and flashlight beams swept across the surface, a distinct pattern emerged. Repeating marks, rhythmic spacing, and tiny symbols that resembled sound rather than language. Dr. Carter leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. She murmured to her colleagues that what they were looking at weren't prayers. They were notes. Everyone went still. There on that cold limestone wall, sealed away for 3,000 years, was something that appeared to be a musical score. And not simple music either. It was layered and complex, carved with symbols tied to ancient instruments, harps, lyres, and possibly even flutes. One particular marking clearly echoed the 10-stringed harp associated with King David. And according to the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 25, Solomon had inherited more than a throne. He had inherited an entire symphony. Outside the chamber, music historians were already locked in debate over what they were looking at. Some argued the style aligned with early Hebrew traditions. Others felt it looked suspiciously Babylonian. The Babylonians eventually chose to conquer Jerusalem. And yes, the king revolted against Nebuchadnezzar, a terrible decision, too refined and too precise to belong to Solomon's era. Back at the site, one of the interns carefully plucked out the markings on a replica harp. The attempt was rough and uncertain, but something about the pattern sent chills through everyone present. These weren't simply musical notes. They were instructions designed for worship. Still, the excitement came wrapped in uncertainty. Were these carvings even authentic? Among the many fragments uncovered beyond the city walls, could these have been left behind by a later ruler seeking to honor or imitate Solomon's court? Some of the markings hinted at a Persian influence. Others were simply impossible to date with any confidence. But whatever their origin, the result was the same. For a brief moment, the tomb no longer felt like a burial place. It felt alive. Every inscription was scanned with lasers and cataloged with microscopic precision. One careless touch, one breath too near, and thousands of years of music could disappear forever. Yet even that danger couldn't keep the team from following the sound. And when the last note seemed to fade away, the chamber held one final surprise. Tucked directly beneath the carved score, sealed firmly within the wall. It wasn't music, and it wasn't a map, but it pointed somewhere even further down, perhaps toward the truth. Toward the tomb itself. If only these stones had a voice, what a triumphant chorus they would raise, heralding the arrival of the king. Is this truly where Solomon was buried? After all the golden rings, ancient melodies, and temple inscriptions, here is the part nobody anticipated. They still have not found Solomon's body, not even remotely close, despite all the noise on social media and those breathless headlines declaring that Solomon's tomb had finally been discovered. The reality is far murkier. Yes, the chamber was genuine. The artifacts were undeniable. And archaeologists openly admit they haven't uncovered even half of what might still be buried there. Every sign pointed to the 10th century BCE, Solomon's era, but it was not a burial site, at least not yet. Right there in that tent pitched just outside the city of David, Dr. Carter and her crew sat surrounded by maps, tablets, and every type of scanner archaeology has to offer. What they'd uncovered could have been a royal archive, perhaps even a private place of worship. But there was no sarcophagus, no skeletal remains, no royal death mask, just the legacy of a king and a trail that keeps slipping away. Still, the evidence was difficult to dismiss. The menorahs, the harp carvings, the Queen of Sheba inscriptions, and the golden seal were all shouting Solomon. But without a body, it's like discovering the crown with no one wearing it. That didn't put a stop to the speculation, though. Certain experts were convinced the tomb was nearby, just buried deeper. Others cautioned that the whole story might be an elaborate work of symbolism. Solomon's life remembered, but never physically preserved. And as we uncover this soil, we connect with God and with one another, I believe, in a way that genuinely matters. AI scans of the site, still heavily restricted because of Jerusalem's religious sensitivity, revealed something worth noting. Hollow spaces, geometric lines running beneath the bedrock, and possibly additional chambers, or possibly nothing at all. But they couldn't excavate. Not yet. The area surrounding the Temple Mount is among the most contested ground anywhere on the planet. Getting anywhere near it demands more than simple permission. It requires full-scale diplomacy, so the team waits. And as things stand today, Solomon's final resting place is still hidden from the world, but the ground hasn't fallen silent, not yet. So what's your take? Was this just the outer edge of something far greater? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because if that next chamber ever opens up, it could shift everything we know, and somewhere deep in that darkness, he just might still be waiting. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.